Chapter 4 of An Iron Will by Orison Swett Marden, assisted by Abner Bailey. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Will Power in its relation to Health and Disease. 1. There is no doubt that, as a rule, great decision of character is usually accompanied by great constitutional firmness. Men who have been noted for great firmness of character have usually been strong and robust. As a rule, it is the strong physical man who carries weight and conviction. Take as an example William the Conqueror, as he is pictured by Green in his history. Quote, "The very spirit of the sea robbers from whom he sprang seemed embodied in his gigantic form, his enormous strength, his savage countenance, his desperate bravery. No other knight under heaven," his enemies confessed, "was William's peer. No other man could bend William's bow. His mace crashed through a ring of English warriors to the foot of the standard. He rose to his greatest heights in moments when other men despaired. No other man who ever sat upon the throne of England was this man's match." End quote. Or take Webster. Sidney Smith said, quote, "Webster is a living lie, because no man on earth can be as great as he looks." End quote. Carlyle said of him, quote, "One would incline at sight to back him against the world." End quote. His very physique was eloquent. Men yielded their wills to his at sight. The great prizes of life ever fall to the robust, the stalwart, the strong. Not to a huge muscle or powerful frame necessarily, but to a strong vitality, a great nervous energy. It is the Lord Brougham's, working almost continuously 144 hours. It is the Napoleon's, 20 hours in the saddle. It is the Franklin's, camping out in the open air at 70. It is the Gladstones, firmly grasping the helm of the ship of state at 84, tramping miles every day and chopping down huge trees at 85, who accomplish the great things of life. To prosper you must improve your brain power, and nothing helps the brain more than a healthy body. The race of to-day is only to be won by those who will study to keep their bodies in such good condition that their minds are able and ready to sustain that high pressure on memory and mind which our present fierce competition engenders. It is health rather than strength that is now wanted. Health is essentially the requirement of our time to enable us to succeed in life. In all modern occupations, from the nursery to the school, from the school to the shop or world beyond, the brain and nerve strain go on, continuous, augmenting and intensifying. As a rule, physical vigour is the condition of a great career. Stonewall Jackson, early in life, determined to conquer every weakness he had, physical, mental, and moral. He held all of his powers with a firm hand. To his great self-discipline and self-mastery he owed his success. So determined was he to harden himself to the weather that he could not be induced to wear an overcoat in winter. "I will not give in to the cold," he said. For a year, on account of dyspepsia, he lived on buttermilk and stale bread, and wore a wet shirt next his body because his doctor advised it, although everybody else ridiculed the idea. This was while he was professor at the Virginia Military Institute. His doctor advised him to retire at 9 o'clock, and no matter where he was or who was present, he always sought his bed on the minute. He adhered rigidly through life to this stern system of discipline. Such self-training, such self-conquest, gives one great power over others. It is equal to genius itself. "I can do nothing," said Grant, "without 9 hours' sleep." What else is so grand as to stand on life's threshold, fresh, young, hopeful, with a consciousness of power equal to any emergency, a master of the situation? The glory of a young man is his strength. Our great need of the world to-day is for men and women who are good animals. To endure the strain of our concentrated civilization, the coming man and woman must have an excess of animal spirits. They must have a robustness of health. Mere absence of disease is not health. It is the overflowing fountain, not the one half full, that gives life and beauty to the valley below. Only he is healthy who exults in mere animal existence, whose very life is a luxury, who feels a bounding pulse throughout his body, who feels life in every limb, as dogs do when scouring over the field, or as boys do when gliding over fields of ice. 2. Yet, in spite of all this, in defiance of it, we know that an iron will is often triumphant in the contest with physical infirmity. "Brave spirits are a balsam to themselves. There is a nobleness of mind that heals wounds beyond salves." One day, said a noted rope walker, "I signed an agreement to wheel a barrow along a rope on a given day. A day or two before, I was seized with lumbago. I called in my medical man and told him I must be cured by a certain day, not only because I should lose what I hoped to earn, but also forfeit a large sum. I got no better, and the doctor forbade my getting up. I told him, 'What do I want with your advice? If you cannot cure me, of what good is your advice?' When I got to the place, there was the doctor protesting I was unfit for the exploit. I went on, though I felt like a frog with my back. I got ready my pole and my barrow, took hold of the handles, and wheeled it along the rope as well as I ever did. When I got to the end, I wheeled it back again, and when this was done, I was a frog again. What made me that I could wheel the barrow? It was my reserve will." What does he know, asks the sage, who has not suffered? Did not Schiller produce his greatest tragedies in the midst of physical suffering almost amounting to torture? Handel was never greater than when, warned by palsy of the approach of death, and struggling with distress and suffering, he sat down to compose the great works which have made his name immortal in music. Beethoven was almost totally deaf and burdened with sorrow when he produced his greatest works. Milton, writing "Who best can suffer, best can do," wrote at his best when in feeble health and when poor and blind. "Yet I argue not against Heaven's hand or will, nor bate a jot of heart or hope, but still bear up and steer right onward." The Reverend William H. Milburn, who lost his sight when a child, studied for the ministry and was ordained before he attained his majority. He has written half a dozen books, among them a very careful history of the Mississippi Valley. He has long been chaplain of the Lower House of Congress. Blind Fanny Crosby of New York was a teacher of the blind for many years. She has written nearly 3,000 hymns, among which are "Pass Me Not, O Gentle Saviour," "Rescue the Perishing," "Saviour more than life to me," and "Jesus keep me near the cross." "The truest help we can render one who is afflicted," said Bishop Brooks, "is not to take his burden from him, but to call out his best energy, that he may be able to bear." What a mighty will Darwin had! He was in continual ill health. He was in constant suffering. His patience was marvellous. No one but his wife knew what he endured. For 40 years, says his son, "he never knew one day of health." Yet during those 40 years he unremittingly forced himself to do the work from which the mightiest minds and the strongest constitutions would have shrunk. He had a wonderful power of sticking to a subject. He used almost to apologize for his patience, saying that he could not bear to be beaten, as if it were a sign of weakness. Bulwer advises us to refuse to be ill, never to tell people we are ill, never to own it ourselves. Illness is one of those things which a man should resist on principle. Do not dwell upon your ailments, nor study your symptoms. Never allow yourself to be convinced that you are not complete master of yourself. Stoutly affirm your own superiority over bodily ills. We should keep a high ideal of health and harmony constantly before the mind. Is not the mind the natural protector of the body? We cannot believe that the Creator has left the whole human race entirely at the mercy of only about half a dozen specific drugs which always act with certainty. There is a divine remedy placed within us for many of the ills we suffer. If we only knew how to use this power of will and mind to protect ourselves, many of us would be able to carry youth and cheerfulness with us into the teens of our second century. The mind has undoubted power to preserve and sustain physical youth and beauty, to keep the body strong and healthy, to renew life, and to preserve it from decay many years longer than it does now. The longest lived men and women have, as a rule, been those who have attained great mental and moral development. They have lived in the upper region of a higher life, beyond the reach of much of the jar, the friction, and the discords which weaken and shatter most lives. Every physician knows that courageous people with indomitable will are not half as likely to contract contagious diseases as the timid, the vacillating, the irresolute. A thoughtful physician once assured a friend that if an express agent were to visit New Orleans in the yellow fever season, having $40,000 in his care, he would be in little danger of the fever so long as he kept possession of the money. Let him once deliver that into other hands, and the sooner he left the city the better. Napoleon used to visit the plague hospitals even when the physicians dreaded to go, and actually put his hands upon the plague-stricken patients. He said the man who was not afraid could vanish the plague. A will power like this is a strong tonic to the body. Such a will has taken many men from apparent deathbeds and enabled them to perform wonderful deeds of valour. When told by his physicians that he must die, Douglas Jerrold said, "And leave a family of helpless children? I won't die." He kept his word and lived for years. End of chapter 4.